Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 282. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the nationally acclaimed and Clio Award-winning Chris Lincoln, who is here to talk about his latest book, The Funny Moon.
Hi, Barney. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. As of this recording, this is launch day for your newest book, correct?
It is. It's an exciting day. 7/11. So those are good numbers. We're excited about it.
Before we kind of jump in and start talking about some of this stuff, do you want to give people a bit of background on what some of your inspiration and your process of writing the book?
Sure. I'd be happy to. The inspiration was really actually came from my wife, Cece, who for many years, I've written other manuscripts and along different subject matter, but she was always saying, why don't you write something funny? Because you write funny letters, you do funny Christmas cards. I'd like you to do something funny. So she has some sisters down in Charleston, and in the winter, she'll often go to visit them. She grew up in Atlanta, and winter in Vermont can get kind of long. So we go down to Charleston, and one winter she ended up staying a little longer, and her birthday was coming in April, and I decided, I'm going to write this funny story that she wants me to write something funny. So I kind of pounded out a draft really over a couple of months, 2.5 months, and then I was able to present her with that draft on her birthday in mid-April, and then I had to go hide while she read because I can't bear to be in the same room or know what the reaction will be. And so I had to hide and wait. And when I heard some laughter from another room, I thought, okay, I'm on the right track. And when she finished, she had some very helpful suggestions. And as I said, it was a draft, and you always hope that the first draft will be the winner, but we always know it's not. You have to rework things. And she was very helpful, suggesting some reworking. So we collaborated on that. And so it's a story about, you're supposed to write about what you know. And what I know is being married. We've been married for 38 years. It'll be 39 years this fall. I know raising kids. We've raised 2 sons. I happen to know working in advertising. And I'm an avid golfer, so I know a lot about golf. But I also know about things from Cece's side. She's a massage therapist. She happens to do energy work. She's built a labyrinth, which is just a stunning piece of artwork on our property. And she also, through her work, does communication. Well, she doesn't do communication with animals, but her sister does. One of her older sisters communicates with animals, and all of her family seems to have the ability to communicate with dead people. So people from the other side. So all of that got integrated into the book. And I think that's some of the more entertaining elements that people will find.
So how direct or loose is the comparison between you and your wife and, say, Wally and Claire? Yeah,
so everybody's asking that. And I've decided that the answer is it's not a memoir, it's a novel. Mm-hmm. So while things are maybe based on what we know and what we've experienced, Wally and Claire are not who we are. I think Cece's older brother said it pretty well today. He's been reading an early copy and said, I know it's not you, Cece, but it's your voice. And I know it's not you, Chris, but it's your voice. So, it's about the life we know, but the story is not our story.
When you were writing this, how much of this came from imagination and how much of this came from interpretations of things that happen throughout your life or versions of things that happen throughout your marriage and life?
Yeah, I would say it's largely imagined. When you're working on a story, there are certain structural elements that you have to keep in mind that the reader expects a story to unfold in a certain fashion. And life never unfolds in a certain fashion. It's very random, and things just occur. And that doesn't really work for a novel. It can work for a memoir. It could work for nonfiction, narrative nonfiction. But so there's a great deal of conscious creation, if you will. And so that's what it is. The conversations are imagined, situations are imagined, the scenario as it unfolds is all imagined. What isn't imagined is the location. It's and the location, as another reviewer said, really becomes almost like another character. It's set here where I live in the Upper Valley of New Hampshire and Vermont, right on the Connecticut River, and it's a beautiful area. It also was a big inspiration for my writing. The rivers, the lakes, the mountains, all of this is part of the book and what makes it distinctly set in a particular place. And that's, another thing that's real, but it's also a fictional version of where I live. The towns aren't the same name. I've changed the names so that I have a little license. You need license when you're creating a story.
Right. And so do you say that way also, that the setting is its own character as well then?
That's what one reviewer kind of commented on, that it becomes so vivid that it's like a character. And I thought that was a very nice comment, and I took it as a compliment.
Which part of the book did you have the most fun writing? Which character did you have the most fun writing for?
Oh, that's a great question. There are several characters I enjoyed writing. One of them was Cece's grandmother, and she actually is a real character from real life. Everything she does in the novel is imagined. What she says is imagined, but she is truly that person, and she's obviously been gone now for some time, but she was a wonderful character and a writer herself. And I actually call on her as one of my writing guides when I need a little help. So who knows, maybe she wrote some of her own dialogue. Cece's from Atlanta. She's a Southern, an old Southern woman, and real Georgia peach, and had a lot of great comments and wisdom to share with Claire.
Did at any point as you're writing the draft of this that the characters took it in a direction that you weren't expecting?
In places, I think scenes unfolded in ways I didn't expect, and that's always a good thing, because the reader the reader's always one step ahead of you. And when you don't know what's going to happen, or something surprises you as the author, it's bound to also surprise and keep the reader interested and active. So yeah, I think there were scenes when something would turn in a way that surprised me, but ultimately, that scene's on a disc, on your computer, on a file, and you can go back and rework it as you need to, and should sometimes, for the integrity of the storytelling. But that would happen, or they'd say something that would be welcome and surprising. But the other character that I really enjoyed writing, and I want to mention, is the dog. And you mentioned there's animal communication.
Yeah.
The dog was really fun to write, because the dog says exactly what's on his mind, and has a perspective on humanity that I think is interesting and more darkly comic at times. And that was definitely fun. And for Cece's older sister, Gail, who does communicate with these animals, she does actually hear them speak. You and I wouldn't, but it's this sort of telepathic communication. So that was fun, trying to figure out how to set that up and execute that.
So when you were originally thinking about writing this book, at what point during your creative process did you say, I need a talking dog in this book?
That's a good question. It came pretty early.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the talking dog has been in every draft from the second chapter, or the second or third or fourth. You have to cut when you're trying to write a story, because you have all this stuff in there you think is wonderful, but it's actually not serving the story. It's serving you and your ego, so you have to get rid of it.
Right.
And that was a common refrain from Cece over the course of the editing process, which, she shared with me, was get rid of it. I heard that a lot. It became her mantra. That talking dog was there from the get-go.
Made the cut the entire time. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, well, it got better and better because
Right.
he actually helps Claire to progress in her story arc. He's an important part of how she manages life during the time where she's struggling with Wally. So it's a valuable character to have.
Was there a section in the book that you just, even to the point now of a publication, that you just can't wait for people to get to that part of the book? It's gonna hit on all notes.
I think maybe the first time people meet and say hello to Mama Betty, where Claire is actually, Mama Betty appears to her. It's a crisis moment for Claire, and there is her grandmother appearing out of the ether to help her and to advise her, but with her inimitable wit and wisdom. That's a pretty good one. There's another one where she appears later for Wally as well. And I don't want to really give away how that happens, but when it happens, she basically unleashes Wally's ability to achieve what he wants to achieve, which is to write a book, because that's been his goal for a long time. But for one reason or another, he has not achieved, success with that. So
Right.
she's pretty much of a good heroine, secondary character.
Talk to us a little bit about your process. Do you write in the mornings, write in the evenings, or how do you dedicate that time for you to sit down and actually write out that first draft and second draft and whatnot?
Excellent question. I love to write early in the day. I'm better first thing in the morning, even before having anything to eat. Usually just a little cup of green tea and do a little warm up. It could be just anything. It could be a dream. It could be what happened the day before. It could be what might happen later. Just get loose, and then you're jumping into the narrative. One of the great tips that I got years ago through reading about other writers, and I think it might have been in the Paris Review series, Writers at Work, they asked Ernest Hemingway, how did he know when to stop every day or when to stop? He said, always stop when you know what's going to happen next.
Oh, that's a good point.
And it's a great bit of technique, advice, and I always do that. And it's generally not about time. It's usually about word count. So I want a certain number of words every day. I've learned that if I exceed that word count by, half again as much or twice as much, because I think I'm really on a roll, invariably it affects the next few days, because you're just taking a little more out of yourself. It's a marathon to write a novel. It takes a lot of energy. It takes steady effort. It's not a sprint. It's not a short story. It's certainly not like writing an ad, which I did for many years. So you really have to be disciplined and let yourself go away from the computer after the word count is done, and you know where you're going next. And then you can return the next morning ready to go, and you know where to pick up, and there's no hesitation.
How did your career in advertising prepare you to sit down and write a novel?
Well, in advertising, I mean, that's a professional writer. You have to deliver.
Right.
And so there's no inspiration. There's work. And you can't wait around and hope that you're going to get a thunderbolt from above. And advertising is based on certain disciplines, and I learned them very well from my boss in Boston, who's been a wonderful mentor for my writing, Dave Greeley. And Dave, taught me that, when you're going to create an ad, it has to be based on a process, and there was a discipline to analyzing input and who's your target audience, what's the primary target, what's the message, what's the point of difference, all of that stuff that goes into writing an ad. In a way, you can translate it to the discipline of writing a novel or writing fiction or writing journalism. You you have to sit down and figure out what you're going to do and do it. You can't
Right.
wait. You got deadlines in advertising. It's also very competitive. There are other people in the agency. There are other people who want to work on the same account. And there's always people knocking on the agency door looking for jobs. So you're really only as good as your last ad, the last thing you've done, and you've got to move on to the next one and do it as well as you can. That's invaluable for being a novelist.
Right.
You've got to be disciplined.
Right. So that, as you said, it writing ads, you have an audience in mind. Correct. Every time you make that ad. But for your book, did this to first start off as kind of like a love letter to your wife?
Yeah, I guess that's a great way to put it. It was certainly that. And you have your ideal reader in mind. And she certainly was that ideal reader. But as I revised the book and worked on it further, that ideal reader grew and spread into others. And I'm not going to. It's not a literary novel. It has literary qualities. I've gotten some nice praise for how well it's been crafted. But I also wanted to write something that the average person would enjoy reading and would get, some pleasure from, and maybe some insights thrown into the humor, and maybe some recognition of, oh yeah, I know what that's like. Yes, I felt the same way sometimes with my spouse, or boy, oh boy, I've got this issue with him or her. So, that's all in there. And I really wanted to have a wide audience. I didn't want it to appeal just to certain type of person, but have it be as universal as possible.
Did you feel it was important to add a lesson to this book at all or anything, or is this just made purely as a story for story's sake?
I think there are some lessons involved there, because there are some universal themes, and within those, we're all trying to find our way through this world. And I think there are things that Claire and Wally are trying to accomplish, and there's the element of self-discovery. My friend Dave Greeley called it a coming of middle age story, as opposed to a coming of age story, coming of middle age. And I thought that was brilliant. It's true. Aren't we all evolving all the time? And if we're not, sometimes we're being forced to evolve by circumstances. That, I think, is a big part of if there is a message, that's part of it. And it wasn't a conscious thing to set out to, I've got, I'm on this bandstand for this particular thing. Right. It's more natural in the flow of the story.
What made you decide to take this one and then knock on the door of Rootstock and say, hey, I think I got something here?
I've had some success with the others. One of them, an unpublished manuscript, was optioned for film at one point.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. And there was a screenplay written, but the film was never developed or produced. And that's usually the case. The vast majority of optioned properties are not made into movies. But that was reassuring that, I could do it. The novel never appeared, but the producer and the director and the writer liked it enough to take the option. There has been some other success. It wasn't as if I just all of a sudden said, okay, I had an agent for several years who tried to sell another book I wrote about living on the West Bank in Israel, where I lived and worked just many years ago, about a settlement and a story there. That came really close with a couple publishers, but the subject matter was tricky and didn't happen. So when I had this done, I did query many agents, and there were a number who wrote back and said, it sounds like a fun book, but I don't know that I can sell it in this marketplace. It's really hard to get an agent, and it's really hard to get in with the big five. That's Random House, Penguin, It wasn't out of the blue that I chose Rootstock. It was more, I believe in the book, and I think there's an audience for it. And a friend of mine, another good friend, John Freeman, mentioned that he knew somebody who had done a book with rootstock, or knew someone who knew someone. I think it was a second removal, and said they'd had a great experience, that had gone very well. So I queried Samantha Kolber, the editor and publisher, last October, and within a week she reached out and said, I'm really interested. I'd like to do this, and but are you committed to this process? And I said, well, let me check. I've been very fortunate to have a friend who's an investor and a big friend. He's read all my manuscripts, and he and his wife have helped to back the publication. So I have two publishers in a way, and a third. There's another good friend who's also been a patron over many years and believed in me. And so this is really in thanks to them. That's so reassuring. It wasn't just me saying this is good. Other people were saying, you should do this. And the great thing about rootstock, as opposed to self-publishing, is they have worldwide distribution. They're connected. They also do a good job of sending out press releases. They help with design and, of course, the editing. Samantha had some very good suggestions on the editing. So many people involved in making this a book.
How important is an editor for an author?
Oh, I think an editor is vitally important, because you're working in a vacuum. Often you're working, alone for, weeks at a time. I don't like to share chapters early. There are some authors who do. I prefer to finish something, because it's easy to get discouraged if you don't get the perfect response, and you're not likely to get the perfect response on a first draft. So as you're going along, it's best just to work in a vacuum. But once you're out of that vacuum, showing it to key readers, to what I call my beta readers, and there are a handful of them that I trust implicitly, and I know they're going to be honest. And back to advertising. What did I learn at advertising? You got to have a thick skin. You're going to get your ideas shot down every day. You're going to get your ideas embraced now and then, and you're going to have some success. But you have to be very thick-skinned about moving on, taking criticism, taking advice, and growing and getting better. And that's a big part of what an editor can do. The primary editor of this book is Cece. Clearly, because we've collaborated closely. But Samantha came in at a perfect time and had some suggestions for some additions that were really good, and I think put the book up to another level. And without her, you don't have the same book. So editors are very important. If I had an editor to start another project, I think I would discuss it in general terms as opposed to showing pages. Discuss the story, discuss the arc, discuss the characters. Where is it going? That sort of thing would be invaluable with a good editor. My friend Dave Greeley is a very good editor. So, I'm lucky. I have those people, and like I said, beta readers. And for this book, because it's a big female character and there's a big female arc, I had some key female readers, including Cece's sisters and a good friend from college, Carol Clemency, Lisa Wheeler. There have been plenty of key females weighing in as well, and that's really helpful.
What were some of the things that happened from your first draft that did not make the cut to the final draft that you were just really holding on to and hoping that it would have made it?
Well, one of the big things was there was a lot more golf in the first draft.
Was there?
I love golf, and there was a lot of golf. And one of the agents that I sent that draft to, when it was done and ready and to be submitted, there was several drafts after the first, but it was a manuscript. He said, I really like your style. You got a great voice. It's easy reading, and there's some wonderful characters. Men aren't likely to want to read about women's issues, and women aren't going to want to read about golf. So basically what he's saying is I had 2 books in one. And so I had to try to whittle it down so that there was really one story. And that was the story of Wally and Claire, and not overdo it with too much of Wally's golf imaginings and golf activity. Yeah, so some of those early beta readers would read it and said, "Oh, I loved it, but I just skipped over the golf parts." So there's still a little golf, but it's much more digestible and quicker and more effective.
Right.
So that's
what would okay. So what was some of that? Is there some symbolism behind the golf? Because it seems like you have a lot of symbolism and avatars that are involved within the story here.
No, I don't think so. I mean, golf is, for me and maybe for Wally, golf is a place that he can go when he's hitting balls, and he does this in the book, and spend some time by himself and clear his head while he's hitting balls and have his imaginary thoughts about his life. Try to figure out, what's going on here and what am I actually doing and what's working and what isn't. So it's not so much about golf as it is about sort of a meditation, if you will, while you're hitting the ball. And this isn't playing a round of golf. It's sort of practicing. And he has a sanctuary that he goes to do this, a beautiful natural surroundings of the fairways and the trees and just watching the ball fly. And it's kind of poetic for him. And it reveals something about his character. So it's not, I hit the ball 450, I hit the ball 210, then my second shot was over the pond. It's different. It's much more about golf. For Wally is more of a journey and a meditation and exploration into himself.
What's some advice would you give to other authors who are going to be saying, Chris, I got a book here. What do I do with it? What would be some of your advice for people to kind of like take that next step after writing their own manuscript?
So, I guess the key thing is you have to find some people who are good readers and you would trust to be honest with you about feedback. The hardest thing is nobody wants to hurt your feelings, but you're not going to get any better if they're not willing to sort of say what they really feel. And so hopefully, and I think it's proven by the fact that Samantha called within a week of reading, I took to heart what I was told, and I think people were honest. But if you've got a manuscript, you need to share it with some people who are going to give you honest feedback. And then you have to be willing to understand that it may not be ready to submit. It may not be ready to query an agent or an independent publisher. You may need to work on it more. And the odds are highly likely you'll need to do more writing. Writing is rewriting. And you don't want to know how many times I rewrote this, what is now the book. Many, many, many drafts.
How organic or how specific did you have to be to create the setting around your characters?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is how did I figure out how to unfold the story?
Right.
Because that is ultimately what it's all about. People want to read a story. And I have read about telling stories. I've gone to, there are books that you can find, writing books that will help teach you to learn about structure. Because I think if there's been a weakness in my other books, in a couple of cases, the structure. So, yeah, you've got to figure out, and I sort of believe in the first, second, and third act. I think people want to read a story. This isn't experimental fiction. It's not just stream of consciousness. There are elements that you want to try to establish so that you can carry the story forward. And there's certain times during the storytelling that you have to hit certain points. It's screenplays are highly structured. I think novels are often highly structured. And the average author, of which I'm certainly one, needs that structure. You're not a genius who can just come out and tell a brilliant story with all the elements. So
Right.
you're writing sections, and then you're saying, okay, well, how does this work with what's to come? Is there enough uncertainty here? Or is there enough change here? Is there enough, conflict? Nothing moves forward in a story without conflict. Many people are writing beautifully, but if there's not any conflict, you don't have a story. So something has to be going wrong. Something has to be off.
Right.
And it can't be the same thing that's off all the time. It has to graduate from one step to another. And then there has to be surprises on top of that. If the reader knows what's coming or can smell it, they lose interest.
Right.
So there's a lot of things beyond writing a sentence that are involved in telling a story. And that's been an education for me.
It's like you're like painting a scene with words in a way.
Yeah,
too.
you are. And you're painting, many, many scenes that build one upon the other that are creating some tension and interest and making the reader want to find out what's going to happen next. That's crucial to telling the story. And learning how to do that can take a while if you're slow at the take up, like I guess I have been. But I think that's one of the big things I've learned with this book is how you have to structure it.
Right. And so what are some of those lessons, as you mentioned, there are some other lessons learned that you wished you knew when you wrote your previous manuscripts?
Beyond the structure element, it might be the importance of change. There really has to be, your main character has to have a problem, and they have to be trying to focus on that problem or figure it out or solve it, and it has to continue to get more challenging. They've got to have some things that they're not conscious of.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're all, none of us know really what's making ourselves tick at any given moment completely. Right. And so if there's that element in it, then I think you actually have something that's even richer and fuller and more real to human experience. So adding that is important.
If people want to learn more about you or learn more about Funny Moon, where's the best place they could go to?
Well, you can learn about the Funny Moon at Rootstock site. You can learn about it at my website, which is just up there right now, which is chrislincoln.net. I have a Facebook account. I don't really talk about, that's just to let people know what's happening with the book and reviews. And I've started to do a little bit of Instagram, sharing some photos and some updates. But probably my website would be a good place to go.
Okay.
I think you're showing the Instagram there. I've got a picture of the labyrinth and the moon rising and some stuff about, a nice review. And
this has been fantastic and really excited that your book came out today and looking forward to the sequel, right? Is there going to be a sequel to like the Somber Sun or something like that or anything?
It's a great question. Our younger son, we talked to him over the weekend and I'd sent him an advanced review copy because he was being demanding that he wanted to see it. While our older son, who's more patient, was like, yes, fine, Dad, I'll wait. I talked to Nick and he was like, so is there going to be another, it's sort of set up at the end that there could be a sequel. And the answer is, if it does well enough, I have many notes for the sequel. Plenty of notes.
Then, Chris, you're going to have to come back on when you write your sequel book.
Thank you, Barney. I would love that. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time and ask such great questions.
All right, you're welcome. Well, yeah, and there's almost, as you said, there's this homage and inspiration because it's about, a married couple,
Yep.
and you wrote this as a birthday present almost to your wife. How much is the I'm going to this is the great part about this, Chris. I get to timestamp this, so then when I actually edit it later, it's just so smooth.
Great.
So it is 7.